All right, we're about to dive into one of the most elegant, most mind-bending, and honestly most stubborn ideas in the entire history of philosophy. Seriously. It's an argument that's been declared dead and buried more times than you can count, only to pop right back up in a new form. This is the story of the ontological argument.
At its very core is this one wild question. Can you actually define something into existence? Just think about that for a second. Can the concept of a thing, just the idea of it, contain its own proof that it has to be real? This puzzle has kept some of the world's greatest thinkers busy for almost 1,000 years.
So what exactly are we talking about here? Well, the ontological argument is what philosophers call an a priori argument. And all that means is that it doesn't rely on any outside evidence. No experiments, no looking at the world. The whole claim is that just by analyzing the definition of God, using nothing but pure reason, we can logically figure out that God has to exist. It's an attempt at a proof that happens entirely inside your head. Okay, to see how this is supposed to work, let's look at one of its most famous champions, the 17th century philosopher René Descartes. He laid out a version of this argument that's so simple and so elegant that at first glance it feels almost impossible to argue with. Here's the logic step by step. First, Descartes says, okay, I can conceive of an idea of a supremely perfect being, right? Got it? Step 2. By definition, this perfect being has to have all the perfections, all-knowing, all-powerful, you get the idea. And now here comes the big move. Step 3, he says existence itself is a perfection. I mean, it's better to exist than to not exist, right? So that leads straight to the conclusion, if this being has all perfections, it absolutely must have the perfection of existence. Therefore, it has to exist. It kind of seems airtight, doesn't it?
To really make this click, Descartes used a great analogy. He said that existence is just part of the very essence of a perfect being, the same way a valley is part of the essence of a mountain. You literally can't have one without the other. For Descartes, trying to think of a perfect God that doesn't exist is a total logical contradiction. It's like trying to imagine a triangle that doesn't have 3 sides. It just breaks your brain.
So for about 100 years, this argument was a philosophical powerhouse. But then along came the 18th century heavyweight, Immanuel Kant, and he delivered what a lot of people thought was the final, fatal blow to this whole idea.
Kant had this massive objection, one that completely changed the game. He looked at Descartes' neat little argument and basically said, whoa, hold on a second, you've made a huge mistake about what the word exist even means.
Kant's big idea is actually pretty easy to grasp with an example. So imagine $100. You can describe the whole concept, right? The amount, the currency, its value. Okay, now imagine those $100 are real, sitting in your pocket. What new quality did you just add to the concept of the money? The answer is nothing. The description is exactly the same. And that was Kant's killer point. Existence isn't a property or a perfection you add to a definition, like green or heavy.
And here it is in Kant's own words. Being is obviously not a real predicate. It doesn't add anything to the definition of a thing. When you say something exists, all you're doing is positing it. You're just saying that you can find an actual example of that concept out in the real world. You can't just cheat and bake existence into a definition from the start. And just like that, it really seemed like the ontological argument was done for. But hey, remember how I said this idea was unkillable? Just when everyone figured Kant had shut this debate down for good, the argument found a way to come back. And this time, it was stronger and way more complicated than before. The history of this thing is just fascinating. It actually goes all the way back to the 11th century with a guy named Saint Anselm. Then in the 17th century, Descartes gives us that classic version we just looked at. Kant comes along in the 18th and seems to knock it down, but the story doesn't stop there. Because in the 20th century, philosophers like Alvin Plantinga brought it roaring back to life with a brand new set of tools. They started using something called modal logic, which is basically the logic of what's possible, what's necessary, and what could have been. These new arguments are way more abstract. They talk about things like maximally great beings and possible worlds, and they're super cleverly designed to get around Kant's objection. They do this by arguing not about existence as a regular property, but about necessary existence as a property. And at that point, the debate gets, well, incredibly technical, and it's still going on today. You know, all of this kind of raises a much bigger question. After all these centuries of brilliant philosophers and all this intense logical back and forth, what does this argument actually accomplish? I mean, does anyone really start believing in God because of a logic puzzle?
And this question really shifts our focus from pure logic to, actual human beings. Does an argument like this create belief? And for most people, the answer is probably not. And maybe, just maybe, that was never the point in the first place.
See, religious belief is, it's more like a deep commitment, not just nodding along with an argument. People often compare it to love, right? You can't use a logical proof to convince someone to fall in love. Some people even argue that real faith actually requires a bit of a leap, a little uncertainty that a perfect airtight proof would just completely wipe out. And even Anselm, the guy who started this whole thing, was probably not writing to convert non-believers. He was most likely using it as a way to rationally think about and deepen the faith that he already had.
And so that's where we're left. Maybe the real value of the ontological argument isn't about whether it succeeds or fails to prove God. Maybe what it really shows us is something about us, about the incredible power of our minds to build these beautiful, intricate logical systems, but also about the ultimate limits of our reason when we come face to face with the biggest questions there are.